since we have entered this conversation, you need to know, since we have this labor to impeach the Malcolm X narrative, we got great wins so far. And you really need to be aware. So you judge us appropriately. What do you mean, Brother Wesley, y'all got wins? In this labor to impeach the entrenched false narrative, this Herculean task that we are about, we got some wins. I was recently in Baltimore, the home of our dear brother scholar, Zach Kondo, who on a personal level, I have great respect for. If you frequently hear me reference Zach Kondo, take it as a sign of respect that I have for his body of work. And much of Zach Kondo's contribution, in particular the contributions that I am most interested in, he happened to offer them in Newark over the years. So when I was invited to come to New Jersey, to come to Newark, I said, oh, I would like to talk about Malcolm X in Newark. Said, well, Patterson is available. I said, that's even better.
That's what you
even
said.
better.
Yes.
For reasons we will highlight, because that's what we came to talk about, the assassination of Malcolm X. What's Patterson and Newark got to do with it?
Come on now.
We were in Baltimore, where Zach Kondo is based. And during our presentation, we raised the question, is Zach Kondo's narrative credible? Because he is hailed as the authority on the assassination of Malcolm X. His work is considered the most authoritative work on the assassination of Malcolm X. And so I raised the question, is his narrative credible? But it wasn't rhetorical. I answered the question. I demonstrated that Zach Kondo's narrative is discredible. I published the results of our inquiry into that matter, the credibility of Zach Kondo's narrative. Why do we say his narrative is discredible? Here, well, in Newark, Zach Kondo erected a particular pillar of the Malcolm X false narrative. The myth of the sixth assassin, whom he identified as Captain Clarence, who was the FOI captain of Minister Lewis X in Boston, Massachusetts. By identifying Captain Clarence as the sixth assassin of Malcolm X, they were linking indirectly the Honorable Brother Minister Farrakhan to the assassination of Malcolm X. This is what the insidious attempt was. For decades, this claim has been established in the Malcolm X imaginaire. Zach Kondo originated the claim. Our dear brother Omar Shabazz popularized the claim with his many videos. What is the basis upon which this claim rests? An FBI document, a redacted FBI document, fell into the hands of our dear brother Zach Kondo, and the document mentions that there was some Muslim out of Boston who, an anonymous letter, don't know who wrote it, an anonymous letter suggested, check this person out. Word is on the street that he was at the Audubon and he was one of the shooters, and he got shot himself and was recuperating in Florida. Check him out. The identity of the person is redacted. Zach Kondo made the unwarranted decision to insert in that redacted document the name of Clarence. And for years, this was offered as evidence that the Boston Mosque, under the leadership of Minister Lewis X, was an active participant in the murder of Malcolm X, because the FBI identified Minister Lewis X's Captain Clarence, as a sixth assassin. Now, frequently, redacted documents, the unredacted versions find their way to light. And see, when the version was published, the name of the person was identified. Isn't Captain Clarence is a brother named James Cook. James Cook. The FBI tracked him down in Florida and found that the anonymous tip, it was never about Clarence, it's about James Cook, but the FBI tracked him down in Florida and found and published a report that anonymous tip was bogus. Not only was Captain Clarence never implicated in the events of the Audubon on that day, but the one who was implicated in the actual document, the FBI found no evidence. They found him, he wasn't recuperating, he wasn't wounded. An entire pillar of the Malcolm X narrative, the aspect that is so frequently turned against the Nation of Islam, the whole thing was bogus. When I revealed this, and I presented it in Baltimore, Brother Zach Kondo's home and base. When I presented this information to my brother Omar Shabazz's credit, he publicly corrected himself, because he popularized with his movies the bogus claim that Zach Kondo originated. Brother Omar Omar Shabazz posted on my YouTube page, Brother Dr. Wesley, this is Omar Shabazz. I stand corrected about my claims on the Clarence X. Gill and James Cook mix-up in relationship to any alleged presence in the Audubon ballroom and being in Florida, being treated in Florida for supposed wounds. Don't get me wrong, I still see the late Clarence X. Gill as a stone cold villain in this narrative. Well, you got the right. How you see, but I appreciate the integrity.
Yes, sir.
Of instead of digging your heels into a bogus claim, because your name has been associated with it for so long, you were able to self-correct publicly. So, kudos to Brother Omar Shabazz, but I think he felt a little way after that. Because then Brother Omar Shabazz put out a video. Is Wesley Muhammad's narrative credible? I am Zach Kondo. While he was willing to publicly self-correct, because in the presence of truth, falsehood vanishes. Truth knocks out the brains of falsehood.
That's right.
And that false narrative totally evaporated. So for your own credibility, you needed to man up to that mistake. Zach Kondo has not yet. Wanting to come to Zach Kondo's defense, Brother Omar Shabazz put out the video as Dr. Wesley, Malcolm X narrative credible. I am Zach Kondo. He wants to defend his brother, Zach Kondo. And I have no problem with that. This isn't personal. Except to the extent that this narrative has used the Nation of Islam as a personal punching bag.
Come on now.
The architects of this narrative in particular. But we don't return in kind. We just correct the narrative. I am Zach Kondo, so he wants to defend his brother, and in doing so, he claims that Wesley Muhammad's narrative is not credible. Why is my narrative not credible? Primarily because he says I got it wrong. I have spoken on Reuben Francis, one of Malcolm X's chief lieutenants on that day. He was a traitor to Malcolm X. He did the bidding of the FBI on that day. He was monetarily compensated by the FBI for his involvement in the plot to kill his brother on that day. And I have lifted this and I said that Reuben Francis, the chief of security, Omar Shabazz thought he had an end to discredit my and our narrative. He says, I'm wrong in describing Reuben Francis as Malcolm's chief of security on that day. On the video, Omar Shabazz calls Sidney Seeley, one of Malcolm's lieutenants on that day, and has Sidney Seeley say to Omar Shabazz that it was James Shabazz who was chief of security on that day. And because Sidney Seeley, one of Malcolm's followers, he said James Shabazz was a head of security, and therefore Wesley Muhammad made a mistake. He got it wrong. And so his narrative is as discreditable as that conduct. If I did get it wrong, I would think that I would be able to display the integrity that Omar Shabazz displayed when I corrected him. And I would do so, except that we ain't wrong.
Right.
See, on that day, at the Audubon Ballroom, whatever Sidney Seeley tells you, Brother Omar, we got the testimony of the security personnel on that day. The testimony of those involved in the security apparatus describing who was in charge of security on that day. Brother Omar, James Shabazz was Malcolm's chief of staff. He had overall control of the men on that day, but Reuben Francis was the chief that put all of the security in place. Brother Omar, John D.X. Davis, he was over rostrum security. The 3 ships of the rostrum guards, a total of 9 guards that were supposed to cover the rostrum for their leader, but on cue disappeared. On cue disappeared, leaving their leader as a exposed duck on stage. This is how the police inspector described Malcolm X. He was left as a sitting duck on stage. But he tells us Reuben X was in charge, overall in charge of security. Testimony of Abe Taylor. Abe Taylor was over the ushers on that day. The ushers who seated the guests. Abe was over the ushers. He tells us James 67X and Reuben were in overall charge of security. Abe reports to Reuben and James. Ushers turn collections over to James, turn the money over to James. George Whitney, who is stationed outside the back room where Malcolm sat, he tells us Reuben, assigned by Reuben to sit by the stage, sit by the stage door leading to the office. And William George, he was on the outside door. The Audubon, he's the one that let all of the assassins in with their weapons. William George, he says, placed on the front door of the Audubon Ballroom by Brother Reuben. See, dear Brother Omar, if we were wrong, we would show the type of integrity that you did. We just happen to not be wrong. Reuben Francis was the point person of security on that day. And why that is important is because Reuben Francis was one of the chief Judases of the Judas team that we have identified. So what is our point? Our point is We got wins. Not being braggadocious, but it's about credibility. Whose narrative is credible? There is the desire to dismiss the narrative of the Nation of Islam. So I said we have a Herculean task. Not just impeaching that one, but also convincing you of the credibility of our narrative. But we got wins, and you should know that. Now,